Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu-alaikum. Ji ayanu bukhair ni hao chunushumme washmale. Ohio Gonzaimas. Guten Morgen. Hola. Bonjour. Privet. Kaifa hal? Hale shumachatore. Ahlan wasalam. Marhaba. Buna. Mucho. Gracias. Swabia. Balli kare aya. Hosh galden. Anayo sayo. Khuyamura. Chi vato. Chi hal yud kalimera. And a very warm welcome to everybody who's tuned into PTV World and watching World this morning. Alongside my very well-learned colleague who happens to be Miss Hajra Satti. I happen to be Shahzad Hassan Khan, and it's a fine sunny Tuesday morning over here in Islamabad, ladies and gentlemen, where the temperature is getting hotter. And yes, I think people really need to take a few precautions for that. I have actually advised my family to take ORS on regular basis. What about you, Haja? How are you feeling today?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for introducing me. Jazakallah khair. I think when I was driving to the work, so it was a bit cloudy, but then you can feel a little bit humidity in Islamabad, and according to the Met Office, we are going to have a pre-monsoon rainfall soon.
Really?
Yeah, and I do feel some humidity. Don't you feel that hubs or humidity in the atmosphere?
I do feel it. In fact, just yesterday when I went to the gym, to
really
work
hot,
out,
yes.
so I couldn't really, I didn't have control over my breath, so I was breathless and I was like, yeah, what's happening? And that was the time when I could actually decide that, okay, last year when, it started to the weather started to be like that, it actually became difficult for us to breathe as well. But other than that, wherever you might be driving from over here in Islamabad, where I was driving from, it wasn't cloudy at all.
Okay,
but
really?
Today, before we get started, let's see.
I think I came early in the morning, so I left my house at 7:30. So maybe the time difference, because of the time difference,
obviously.
and it was really cold at that time because there was a cold breeze blowing, and I was really happy that weather is going to turn out to be fine. But I think just a few minutes back, I just went to my car and it was really hot. So I can imagine what you are talking about. And obviously, our tongues are so much parched that every now we are drinking water, and it's not satiating our thirst at all.
And the way our momentum is to speak, so you really need to take a second to kind of let the tongue actually feel that moisture of saliva as well, and then kind of speak, which is the exact reason why I actually brought a tongue twister for you. And only if Hajra today will say it 10 times fastest than anybody else, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'll give her 1,000 rupees. Okay, let's start
I
from here.
didn't even got the gifts from the London, so what are you talking about?
No, the bag is still on it. The bag is still on its way.
I don't want your incentives.
Okay, but we do have a tongue twister. Let's give it an attempt as well. So the tongue twister is really simple. A pack of mixed biscuits with a biscuit mixer.
A pack of mixed biscuit with a biscuit mixer.
Yeah, 10 times. Okay.
Okay.
Without a mistake, but quickly.
A pack of what?
A pack of mixed biscuits with a biscuit mixer.
A pack of mixed biscuit with a mixer biscuit, something like that. Okay, I failed. I can't do that.
And our producer is trying. So, Seher, I am going to request you to please come over here and give it an attempt. Okay, I think that'll be wonderful. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, we hope and pray that everybody is doing great. Just one simple quick tip, because there's not a lot of shadow that you get from trees these days as well, unfortunately. Because there are not a lot of trees out there which you can sit under or park your car under as well, even especially in your parkings. So please make sure, because a lot of hazardous gases do release when you park your car, right under the sweltering heat out there as well. So please make sure that you kind of put down the windows a little bit, so there's cross ventilation. And as soon as you go back to the car, there's no rush for you to kind of sit inside and turn on the air conditioner, because that kind of contributes to it. So all you need to do is that, put down all the windows, run the fan in the first place, then gradually air conditioner, and then sit down and then go wherever you want to go. But first things first, let's get started with the top story. So Haja, why don't you take the lead?
Okay, thank you so much for this public message. And moving on to our top stories, which is the National Assembly has adopted a resolution condemning the acts of violence, vandalism and the attacks on 9th of May by the mobsters and vandals, and expressed solidarity with the armed forces of Pakistan. The resolution was tabled by Defence Minister Khwaja Asif. Expressing its full faith in and complete solidarity and support for the armed forces of Pakistan, the House resolved that 9th May will be reckoned as the Black Day. It said all the betters, planners, facilitators involved in ransacking military installations as well as public and private properties should be prosecuted under the existing laws of the country.
Exactly. And Hajar, in addition to that, because just yesterday I was listening to the Interior Minister, Mr. Rana Sanaullah Saab as well, and there was a lot of debate that why do you think that all of those people who were involved in the incidents of 9th May were tried under army courts. And he said very clearly, he said that if you're going to damage their places, if you're going to damage damage their houses, obviously that's where you will be tried as well. And for people out there, I've been an advocate of that, that people certainly need to be punished for their actions, and there's no way that a democracy or a democratic power should actually allow for people to kind of come outside and destroy what the government has built for its people. And ladies and gentlemen, I mean, I really feel sorry. I mean, and I really feel sorry for all of those people who've been a part of such hooliganism as well, or vandalism, or breaking all of those sarkari imlak outside as well. So please, ladies and gentlemen, we really need to educate each other. We need to make sure, because I certainly think of the mother of those people who've been out there. Do you think that their mothers would have liked it, that okay, that their son or their daughter was unfortunately involved in damaging the infrastructure of the nation or the country as well? So please, ladies and gentlemen, if you have your friends who were of this sort, or who actually had such an intent on 9th of May, please make sure that you counsel them as well. But moving on, where I'm going to take you to Norway, all the way from Pakistan, is Norway Cup, the largest international football tournament for players between 10 and 19 years old, draws closer. The process to pick the best street talent from Pakistan has kicked off today. Muslim Hands, a charity organization based in Islamabad, began the trials from Muzaffarabad to select a 16-player squad of Pakistan's street child football team. In the first phase, trials will be conducted in different areas of Azad Kashmir, including Rawalakot, Bagh, Bhimber and Kotli. In the second phase, camps will be set up across 3 different cities in Punjab, which include Bhera, Wazirabad and Lahore. And the best part is, I think I'm just going to recommend Muslim Hands to kind of go to Leari in Karachi as well, because that's where the most of the talent lies as well. And we certainly want you to, I mean, it's just a recommendation to Muslim Hands that please make sure that you pick up all of those amazing boys and girls, who can definitely contribute and bring back good name to Pakistan, because when such tournaments does occur, so Hajra, I've seen that, because when we were in college, we would see that, such a tournament is taking place. So PT sir's favorite children are going to make it to the team. Please don't do that. We certainly need to.
And have you witnessed that differentiation or bifurcation where the students who are into the studies and the one who are into the sports? So there was a very distinction between that.
It's always like that. And thank you very much for reminding us, because, imagine, so we were good at basketball, and we used to represent our school.
Because of your height?
No, yes, obviously. I was a defender too as well, and we won multiple on multiple occasions. So imagine that we were so happy to be in the sports team as well, because imagine that we got to miss out on some lectures as well, because then it was a practice session.
And that was a very sore point with the teachers, because they were very angry, and all they wanted was to focus on study, and they don't wanted us to have the life beyond the study. Some of the teachers were like that.
Studies can actually be depressing.
Yes, and I think it's very important to have such sort of physical activities on the campus, on the schools, because this is an important outlet to channelize the productivity of the kids, right? Because not every kid is very bright in the studies, and obviously when you are teaching, there are all sorts of kids, right?
Or at least the studies need to be more interactive, rather than teaching, making sure that you ask more questions, that the kids are actually kind of coming up to the teacher and be like, or I think that the kids actually should be more interested in learning by themselves, rather than teacher pressuring them. Another 45-minute class, we used to be like, head down, let's go to sleep.
Yes, and obviously you're very right in pointing out that we need to move away from that very rote memorialization sort of a paradigm that still dominates our teaching methods. But speaking of our
but this reminds me of one thing, and that is that recently, alhamdulillah, you've taken on to this mission as well, where you're educating a lot of people, right?
Yes.
In fact, the future generations of the country, you're teaching in a university where the responsibility is higher on your shoulder, mashallah. So now, how do you make sure that you do not want ratta from them, but rather a better understanding of what you're trying to teach them? How do you do that?
Okay, so I always encourage their own creativity, their own productivity, and that is why I'm very lax with the marking criteria, because I do not want to copy paste everything from the slide and then write it down. If they are writing it down or taking the concept and writing it down and adding something to that, I always appreciate that, and I always tell my students, because teacher does not need to have chat GPT busted in it themselves, because they can easily identify through your writing that if you have taken it from somewhere. So I always tell them that if you are struggling with your words, if you are not very much apt in the sentences, I always appreciate that, rather than writing a very hi-fi sentences, that too from the copy-pasted sources, right? And that's easily distinguishable, and I can easily recognize that.
And then what about the attendance issue? Because most of the time I've had teachers, who are like, if your attendance is below 95%, 100%.
So I don't agree with this attendance policy in the first place.
So whoever wants to attend, attend.
So if this is the policy of the HSC, and obviously we have to comply by that. But having said so, if someone requests me that they have a genuine issue, so I'm very accommodative in that, right?
Wow.
So yeah.
So if they do not have a genuine issue, and do you kind of check that, okay, you know, whether he or she is making an excuse or not, or do you go back into your own memory, okay, what sort of excuses were we making when you were in university?
I used to compare myself with these students a lot, but then I said that it's not fair. I was a good student. I said that it's very unfair to compare myself with them because every student is unique. So I do not need to compare them, and I think this is also learning curve that as a teachers we are also embarking on. So now moving on to our topic, which is about the depression, and it is alleged about this topic that it's a problem of the first world countries. So in the West you will find that there's a lot of focus on that, there's a lot of social discourse on that, public discourse on that, but in the third world countries the problems are still hinged around very basic human rights, right? So we do not have the basic right of shelter and food and whatnot. But is it really the problem here in the third world countries, or it's a myth that needs to be busted? And what sort of problems our youth are facing with respect to depression? And we talked about the very old or conservative paradigm of the teaching methods, how much that method needs to adopt in order to reduce the problem of the depression. So we are very glad that we have been joined by a wonderful clinical psychologist. She is a beauty with brains, and she happens to be Miss Rohma Shahid. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
After a while, you know, and it's wonderful to have you over here, and that too, you know, when we are to actually speak about depression and anxiety, when a lot of people certainly have no idea. There's a lot of people doing a lot of myth busting. There are a lot of people creating a lot of myths about it as well. So today we are primarily focusing on youngsters and youth, and you know how, God forbid, they end up. You know, so just to get started with it, what do you think are the most common reasons of people getting into depression, unfortunately?
And do you believe it's a third world problem too?
Right, okay. Well, again, you know, always coming up with wonderful topics like this one today. And you know what? I was kind of, you know, wanting to talk about this for quite some time because very recently, like we were talking before, I've had people coming up to my office and my clinic, especially from the age of, let's say, 15 up till 22, with a lot of depression, with multiple reasons. Now, academics is one of them, right? Iske alawa, we're also seeing relationship problems that are 15? Like, you know.
At the age of 15?
Oh,
that's too early.
Yeah, don't even get me started on that.
Really need to keep a check on this,
So yeah, and family.
Yes.
When you don't have that kind of a support system behind you.
And do you feel the news is also a problem, because nowadays a lot of people are watching news and all, it is gloom and doom, and that is also causing.
I mean, that's how news has always been.
It does.
I think the only good news Pakistanis get is, you know, petrol prices have decreased 12 rupees and high-speed diesel has decreased 30 rupees.
True, but you know, the age that we're talking about, they don't really, in my opinion and in my experience, what I've seen is that they don't really care about that at this point. Like a 15 years old, they're already getting what they want. Money, they have a car, they get fuel from their parents. They don't need to worry about that. But talking about the causes of depression, I want to kind of highlight the top three of them, the ones that I'm actually seeing
academics
in my
and
practice.
Relationships.
Yes,
okay.
Actually. Okay, so let's start with academics. So obviously not going to disclose the identity, but recently there was this 15 years old boy coming into my practice and very depressed, a lot of self-harm, a lot of like cuts on his, like there was not even like 1 inch of his arm that wouldn't be without a cut. It was so full of self-harm. Turns out that he used to be a very bright student, very active in sports. He came from the UK when he was, I think, 6 years old, and life was fine, everything was perfect, scoring A's and all. But very recently, the upcoming CIEs, he started studying for that, but all of a sudden his parents were like, you know what, since your CIEs are around the corner, so what you need to do is just go into that room and stay there just that your CIEs don't get over. So they ended the social life of that kid. They ended his playtime, his PlayStation time and everything. And after a few weeks, this guy started to kind of, you know, go into isolation. His appetite went down, he went into sleeplessness, more sort of all signs of depression that we started seeing in him. So, you know, what happened here was that the parents were having like a lot of expectations from him. There was a lot of pressure on his head, on his shoulders, to like score even above A. Now, what's above A? An A plus.
Yes.
But you know, we're okay with A's as well at this point in time, right? So, number one reason, academics. Another thing that I want to share is this guy who came up with me very recently, a med student, 22 years old. His girlfriend left him. He's going through a major breakup, right? And again, unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
Was the major cause behind that, because he was expecting quite a lot from that girl, in the sense where he was totally emotionally depending on her for every single thing. Validation, he needed validation in every aspect of his life. He needed to kind of, you know, ask her the do's and don'ts of every day. Should I do this? Calling her up like in every
Just the way we say Joru ka gulam, you know, that's how we refer it.
Glad you said it. That's the right
when
word.
people actually have to listen to so many other things as well. And, you know, I would want to kind of add on over here. I'm very sorry, but, you know, for all of those people who are out there listening to us in 46 different countries, in Pakistan, culturally, it might not even be right to speak about girlfriend and boyfriend on television. But, ladies and gentlemen, let me be very honest. You know, let us be very honest that it is a reality. And a lot of people obviously do have a lot of emotional connections. And God forbid if it doesn't go the way they've expected.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's how they end up. But there's one more thing which I wanted to talk about over here. Now, imagine that when we were growing up, you know, there were not a lot of phones, okay,
Yes,
you know, because we were growing up in the age of phones, and, you know, our parents never allowed us to have that. There was not a lot of internet, you know, obviously because you had to get a dial-in card for 100 rupees, and your mother won't give you 100 rupees every now and then. You know, so for all of those basic facilities kids have these days weren't very basic back then. You know, it was considered as a luxury, and not everybody had them at their disposal. And, you know, rather what we would think about was, okay, you know, what are we going to eat in the evening? Or, you know, mommy, can you please cook this up? Or we're going to go play cricket. And we were brought up in a very raw condition, you know, where there wasn't a lot of luxury, but rather a bit of slapping and napping too as well. And then
and
you got to listen to them. But do you think that, you know, for all of these problems which have existed, can be because there was lesser participation from their parents when they were growing up, emotional dependency, for example, or even the academic pressure? And then number two, when we talk about depression, is it most of the time when people are thinking about their past or how insecure they are about their future?
Well, you see, what I see these days, again, talking from the professional experience that I have, is that back in those days, there was like a different kind of a connection that we had with our parents. But now, because of, I would blame social media for that. Now, I do understand with all the benefits, you know, we do see a dark side as well. Again, where, you know, when you check out the social media, when you see your friends kind of, you know, showing off with all those luxuries and gadgets and all that, especially the iPhones, you do kind of, you know, go into that phase of, or state of mind where you kind of be like, you know, what do you call it? The inferiority complex, right? Where you kind of, you know, then start blaming your parents that, why can't we get these things? Now, the thing is that the age group that we're talking about, in that age, the kids are not really emotionally and socially developed. They're still like in the process of that. So they don't really understand the realities of life. They're like, we want it and we want it right now.
But we as parents have been short at setting goals. Now imagine that, you know, when I was 15, my father would always tell me every single day that, Putra, you know, if you're not going to study, you will not end up in having a good job, you know. So the goal setting or the priority setting was very different back in our days as well. And I am very thankful that we happen to be from the last of that generation who certainly do not have these problems, you know, because we were, oh yaar, koi nahi to munda hai yaar, you know, all of those things literally worked for us, you know, it uplifted our ego as well. You know, it gave us that morale, and, you know, then, you know, running out with parents, doing stuff, you know, was something which we were always excited about. And these days, and that's one thing which I always said, that the kids actually have to learn not by example, but just by words. And I think that's the only issue. Haja, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, I so wanted to ask this question because we were dissecting and you talked about how academics is also contributing factor towards the depression. Right? Yes, but Shahzad is one thing, because my younger sister, she is studying in university, she is a second semester, and she was doing something, and I said that thankfully that I am done with the studies, because nowadays our attention span is so much damaged that it's very difficult retaining a lot of things, right? do you feel that because of our damaged attention span, our studies are becoming very difficult for us, and that is why we are facing an uptick in the crisis of depression around the world, not just in Pakistan?
Of course, see, lack of focus and concentration again is a symptom of depression.
Yes.
When you're depressed, you tend to get distracted very easily on
Yes.
small things. But academically speaking, when you talk about like academic pressure in this case, right, I think it's important that our instructors do get that psychoeducation in which they can, kind of, deal with the younger generation in a very sober manner, in a way where you go up to their mental level and then communicate with them.
But Roma, we do feel there are a lot of points in our life when we're not feeling at the same point or the same emotional level, right? So we are feeling very elated, and then at another moment we not be finding ourselves very elated, right? So we might be feeling very down. How do we differentiate or define the line between feeling down and when then it turns into depression? Because I do feel a lot of times that there were high moments in my life, but then there were also down moments in my life. But then I do feel that because we are reading a lot on the social media, and there's a social discourse about the depression, and whenever you read the symptoms of any disease, you feel that you have that disease because you started to identifying yourself, right?
Yeah.
So you are a
Please
clinical
let me check
psychologist.
Google on this, because just very recently I got my blood test done, and unfortunately there was this one dropping signal, and there was a red arrow on top of it as well, and as soon as I went on to Google, I couldn't really do the program because early morning I was coming towards work. I was like, okay, yaar, that's a problem, and then I had to go to my doctor, get myself checked up, then went to my father, did my counseling session with him. He was like, yaar, why do you even get worried? There's always medicine available for whatever, God forbid, is going to go wrong. But please, continue.
So yeah, I'm glad you asked this question, because it's important to kind of, draw that line between the actual symptoms of depression, because you know what, in our daily lives, everyone tends to kind of, we're going to have good days and bad days, right? But on those bad days, it's not necessarily that you're depressed, okay? It's just the
For
fact
example,
that
in the COVID, under the lockdown,
Yeah.
we're all feeling very down because that is not a normal thing was us for us, right? But at the same time, I felt like that I had the depression because I was very low in the energy. I didn't want to do anything. But then I asked a clinical psychologist friend of mine. She's like, this is perfectly normal. This is not depression at all, right?
But people becoming antisocial, for a longer period of time is something, God forbid, where you certainly need to check that. There's something wrong.
So it's important to understand the actual symptoms of depression, and there is a certain time when you actually can self-diagnose yourself.
All right, so
you
symptoms.
need to understand.
Yes, please.
So the major symptoms, when it starts, long story short, when it starts affecting your daily life, then that's when it becomes depression.
That happens when my wife has an argument with me. That's when it impacts my daily life.
So what sort of
do the program
What sort of
So
effect
when
on
you
the daily
see, if you're a student, it's going to affect your level of focus and concentration. It's going to affect the level of socializations that you're having.
But then again, I said that we do have a very shortened attention span, right? But is that depression in the first place?
But again, is it affecting your daily functioning? Is it affecting your grades at school?
She's not missing a class or a show. Alhamdulillah. She's fine.
So you need to check out the causes and the factors if they are affecting your daily functioning. Let's say, are you eating enough? Is your appetite gone down, or has it gone up recently? Are you sleeping okay? These are the daily functions that you do perform. Your appetite, your academics, your social life. So if that's being affected, then there's a high chance you need to see
in
someone.
relation to this, I have a couple of things to say, because Alhamdulillah, just from the past 1 or 2 years, I think my spiritual journey has been far enlightening for me, Alhamdulillah, for the previous 25 or 30 years as well. So what I would want to share over here is that, for example, where you spoke about company. Now imagine that ahadith, we get to hear that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told all of us that the best place after your work is your house or your home. You're not supposed to go outside and wander just like that. Number one. Number two, you know, so it's the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you shouldn't really be expecting anything from any human. Number two. Number three, ba the ba naseeb. I think that's like a common phrase we get to hear everywhere. So imagine that these day-to-day challenges that we have put up in place for ourselves, that, you know, okay, I have to go meet that friend, I have to go wear this as well and whatnot. I think it will eventually have an impact. We are over-exerting, we are over-stressing things which are not in our control. People really need to have this faith inside them as well, that, you know, imagine that whatever Allah is going to give me, you know, no matter if the entire world is going to try to stop it, it will still reach me. I think that's one thing which people need to understand. Do you think how religiously, you know, by understanding and having faith in these very you know, verses and ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives you so much of relaxation? And not just that, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pray to Allah Almighty so that he does not get anxiety and depression. Now imagine that it is for real, but how do we draw that line for people, for kids out there and for parents, that God forbid nobody has to suffer from it?
Right. Now see what the ahadith that you quoted, that's where religion and psychology kind of connect, okay? So for example, psychology tells you not to have these expectations. Don't give your happiness, don't make anybody else responsible for your happiness.
Or for your anger.
Or for your anger, yeah. And that's the second hadith that you quoted just now, right? Spend time with your family, right? When you're depressed, that's the number one thing that you need to seek out for.
True.
And you know, if you do have that strong connection and support system behind you, there are chances that you don't even go into that dark phase.
Exactly, and that's wonderful. And God forbid, whenever you realize and you identify, because the first part would be for people to understand and not be in a denial. God forbid if that gentleman or the kid unfortunately is in denial, I think it's the parents' responsibility to take him for professional help. I think that's something which is very important. But at this point of time, I think today the happiest lady in our MCR is our producer, because she gets to work with her babies, and I think we're loving it as well. So we have these amazing voices we can hear in in our talkbacks as well, and I think what she's trying to tell us is to wrap up this segment. But thank you very much, Ms. Roma, for being with us. Lovely to be in conversation with you to talk about the future of our youngsters, which totally is dependent on their mental and physical health. And just on this occasion, I remember that there was this gentleman who posted on Facebook that he went for trekking to some mountain or hilly area, and he said that, you know, because, you know, my mental health wasn't fit, you know, so I thought that I'll go trekking. And once he actually summits it, you know, so obviously he's out of breath. So he's like that, you know, other than my mental health not being fit, my physical health is not fit as well. So I think for people to be out there, you really need to exercise. You need to make sure that you take some good diet, sit down with good set of people, you know, who are actually bringing in some positive influence, and that you do some good things, you know, feel great about yourself. Why not? Because over here in this world, everybody wants to be recognized, and there's nobody who's going to come back and be like, yaar, Shahzad, bahut acha kaam kiya. I think it's towards the end of the day, it's you who are going to tell yourself that, Alhamdulillah, today was a good day because I dressed up, got up, I showed up, and I did what I was supposed to do.
Yes, and I think you should take the holistic care of yourself, be it the spiritual self, physical self, or psychological self, and whatever. So with that, we will wrap up this segment and take a short break. And after that, we have some very interesting discussion lined up. So don't worry.
She's very interested in it. Good morning. Any day. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you very much for staying tuned. Obviously, you know, as I directed, you know, just before heading out towards a short break, that this topic, ladies and gentlemen, is very close to Hajar's heart. But before we move on to that topic, there's one thing which I wanted to discuss with you. And that is, so Mr. Vince has to say that the difference, Mr. Vince, that the difference between a successful person and others is not a lack of strength, not a lack of knowledge, but rather a lack in will. What do you have to say about it?
Yes, of course. And I have witnessed this thing that you read a lot of these life coaching things, yes? And it sets your genre and you will always reference
it pumps me up as well, you know, it gives me new energy. I'm all vibrant about it then.
But I will recount my life journey when I started reading books. So when I was a kid, I used to love Enid Blyton a lot. So I think any kid's library is incomplete with the Enid Blyton. And then I grew up, I started reading a lot of Nancy Drew. And then there was the era of the Harry Potter. So it was the ultimate love for me. And I think still I read that. They're so powerful, moving words by J.K. Rowling. And then ultimately I catapulted into the philosophy, the politics, international relations. And now I'm reading philosophy. And I'm interested mostly in the Islamic philosophy and what Islam has to say about it. And a lot of questions that we tackle in our social lives and what does Islam have to guide about us. So recently I'm reading a book about the Jonathan Brown, and it's called a Hadith, and it's a very dense and systematic study of how Hadiths were collected and then the Hadith criticism that were later developed, and the 6 books of the Hadiths that were eventually developed. So it requires a lot of my time to invest, and I'm only studying that book when I feel that I am fresh. So when I feel that I am not very fresh, so I would not read that book. But Shahzad, you will see that we are living in a very picture-saturated century, right? So every time we
I wish I could read pictures.
No, every time we use a social media, so Instagram is picture-based, TikTok is a picture-based, and Snapchat is a picture-based, and it's said about this century that the words have now been preceded by the picture, other way around, and pictures are being assisted by the words. So a lot of people who are into book reading, and they're facing really a lot of problem because of that, and a lot of people are predicting the death of the book because the knowledge is so much, there's overexposure on the social media because of that. But we would like to pose this question to a wonderful guest of ours because she happens to be a Miss Yamna Hasni. She's a radio broadcaster, development consultant, and she also runs her own book club called Parwaz-e-Takhayyur. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for inviting
Yamna, do
me.
you agree with this assertion that a lot of people are predicting the death of the book?
So I don't know who these people are because I'm not one of them. I'm not predicting the death of books.
I'm in the same club,
So welcome, join the club. We need more members in our book club. So you're one of them, the future members. But I don't see the death of the book. I do not see the death of the published word. And it's very interesting. You talked about the competing mediums and channels. We talked about Instagram and TikTok and how visual and picturesque things are. But I think we can also complement each other and support each other. I like this challenge that turn books into pictures, turn books into art. You have comic books.
And will it count as reading as well? So imagine that, I scooped through a book, it was just pictures. Do you think that you'll consider, okay, I have read a book, or do you think
I will give you a pass.
Or I've seen a book.
I approve that. Okay. I do not want to discriminate.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
I think we need to embrace all sides of the spectrum and embrace all stories and all the ideas that people have.
But you do feel that the concept of the library is very endangered because no one is going to library anymore, right? If Shahzad and I want to read something, we'll just go to a bookstore and buy a book, right? Rather than going to a library to to borrow a book from there, because number one, I think we feel that's a very cumbersome process in registering yourself and then making sure after 2 weeks you go and return the book and then reissue it again, stuff like that, right?
No, but Hajar, it totally depends on how enthusiastic and passionate you are about that one particular book which you're not getting from any bookstore. And then you start to look for people that, okay, this gentleman or this lady might have it, so let me request her. So it totally depends on that one particular book which you've always wanted for yourself.
General, do you go to library or do you take your daughters to library?
In general, it's more like that, how earlier we used to log on to our desktop to actually look at our Instagram and Facebook, but it's not like that now. So I think, where Miss Yamna actually said that, she's not going to kind of disagree with what I said, but rather kind of give me credit for, okay, if it's a pictorial edition of a book, why not? Okay, you've read a book, so let's keep it that way. But one thing which I wanted to kind of ask you, obviously, just because of the peer, the colleague pressure over here, because she reads quite a lot of books, I actually had to be comparative. I was like, okay, I'm going to start reading. And I'm actually an advocate of reading books because, you kind of come across so many wonderful words and lines and stanzas which can actually shape your life and change your life. But just for the sake of an argument, for people who think that, it's really boring, it's not nice and whatnot, and we read so many articles every day because of our work, why do you think reading is important? Let's do that. Or do you think it is important?
I think reading is important. So first of all, what do you learn when you read?
Yeah.
You said yourself, ideas, the power of words, they can definitely change your life. And then and let's ask a simple question to ourselves. Why are we reading? Are we reading for fun? Is it hobby? Is it for work? And I know you read Islamic history and you like Islamic anthropology. You like comic books, and that's fine.
No, I read because, I want to be a better version of myself
Okay,
tomorrow.
great.
That's
so you want to self-improve.
And feel great about reading. Oh, I've read a book.
Okay, so you can also boast amongst friends. You can sound intellectual and knowledgeable. So, it's always good conversation.
That's true.
If you want to make conversation, you're wondering what to talk about other than sports or something else, you can say, hey, have you read something? And that's a really good conversation starter.
That's true. And, when you start to kind of build up on that as well, and, when you're in that intellectual process, you kind of get attached to your friends too as well. And I love intellectual emotion too, and people should actually understand that there is intellectual emotion while we are at it as well.
Intellectual emotion.
And reading is also therapeutic. We talked about mental health earlier on.
It's a great escape too, right?
Exactly.
Then why do you think people have stopped reading literature? Let's start.
I think they're
from here.
lazy.
Yes.
Can I just admit one thing? That people are lazy. We don't
People
want
are listening to podcasts these days. Do you think that's better version of reading a book?
It can always complement your book reading, right? So a lot of podcasts which I listen to.
You will always bring us back to book reading. I know that.
Yes, of course. But I think I used to be a very avid reader back in the days, but now the passion has somewhat lessened down because I have so many other responsibilities. But side by side, I make sure that I don't skip the book reading part. But Yamna, nowadays with the introduction of Chat GPT and artificial intelligence, where people can generate a lot of content, a lot of write-ups by just typing one sentence. What future does that bode for the book readers or writers or fiction writers or whatever? How do you see this development with regards to book
reading again.
I mean, we're still reading. I mean, even if it's being written by Chat GPT, we still have to read it. So this is the question. Do you want to read a book written by a robot? Or do you want to read a book written by a human being? Or you just want a good book and it doesn't make a difference
but it's not written by a robot. Now, that's what it is. So imagine that, all of those, all of that content which was available till 2021 on internet, that's what AI is going to reproduce for all of us.
Which was originally also written by some human being on this planet.
Yes.
So the Chat GPT is just a smart software pulling out the keywords and putting it together.
It's just how they're marketing it, that's it.
That's true. But I think there is a genuine fear, and the publishing industry or the literature industry or just people who are reading and writing, they're of course worried about what the future is. But technology is always there. It's going to evolve. So rather than seeing it as a threat, you can always complement it and work with it.
But Yamna, when I talk about fiction, so you, when we were talking in the break about your genre and you talked about fiction, right? So I feel, and I have genuinely very strong opinion about that when it comes to Pakistani writers, the sort of write-ups, for example, Mohsin Hussain and, Mohsin Hamid and all of these people, whenever they're writing books about Pakistan, so they're sketching a picture which is very polarized, which is very fragmented. And I think it is a huge responsibility on their shoulders because I do feel that we are much more than that polarization and fragmentation and the securitization which has underwent after the 9/11, especially in our literature when it comes to
and
fiction.
not just with literature, even with artwork, even with films and dramas. So I'm not going to name anybody, but a lot of people have actually
misery sells,
got
poverty sells.
A lot of people have actually got a lot of recognition while saying bad things about the country which might not have ever existed. So how do you think that these trends are created?
So, what the authors that you pointed out, what they're writing about, those problems do exist. You can't say they don't. I agree. They are there, but the narrative that has been set, we also need to counteract. As you said, some things are not true or they're very exaggerated or we've moved beyond that narrative. Things that were happening in the 80s and 70s are not happening now. So then obviously there's a vacuum there is space and there's also vacuum. So when I say space, where are those new writers? So a new young writer, they don't know how to get published. So what do? You either self-publish, you go to Amazon, or you just make your own blog and you start writing and publishing there, hoping that someone would read. But the big publishers, and the question is, are there any big publishers in Pakistan left now? There are very few, and if you're very unknown, they won't publish you. Because
people do not even know how to get their patent as well.
Exactly, exactly. So there are a lot of barriers on both sides. And then when you say that we need new narrative, why can't I write a story about myself and my childhood and, you know, growing up, going to the British Council Library or reading Enid Blyton and what I've achieved. And it's not all dark and gloomy, but my Pakistan would be a little different from Mohammed Hanif's Pakistan. That's perfectly fine.
That's true.
But then it's also onus of the writers that they need to write as well.
Exactly, and you're absolutely right on this as well. But very quickly, because, you know, ever since we were growing up, you know, this is this one thing which we have been listening to, and that is that fiction becomes reality. So, you know, there's so much of fiction going on, especially when you see fiction movies, you're like, okay, you know, do you think one day it will be reality? And, you know, there have been occasions that fiction did become reality. Why do you think
Science
that we,
fiction,
why do you think that we have to believe in it, that fiction does become reality? Because we have seen it ourselves that, you know, there were a few things which people used to talk about earlier, then we saw it in films, and now we see that in real. And why have been we listening to this very stanza that, okay, fiction becomes reality?
These are very interesting times.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
if you read George Orwell, you know what the things he predicted. You read them in this 21st century or 22nd century, you're like, oh my God, they're coming true. I think human nature and behavior doesn't change. You know, all your authors, they talk about morality and the good and bad, the triumph of justice. You know, comics also reflect the same. Your DC, Marvel, superheroes, they talk about that. You have the villain and you have the Messiah. So I think human nature does not change. That is why fiction is closer to reality. Those stories, you see them happening every
We
day.
do have flying people now. Imagine, you know, there were authors who used to write about, you know, that they, you know,
Superman and
there'll be
Batman,
machines in the skies, and, you know, we see that
Exactly.
too. We see Transformers now as well, you know. So imagine that everything's becoming reality. So I think that the filmmakers really need to kind of stop somewhere, you know, not be ahead of time this much that, you know, we start to think that, okay, you know, in our life, that's something that we are going to witness.
That's very true. Thank you so much for saying that. But Yamna, so since you read a lot of fiction, so what sort of book recommendations would you put out for our youth, listeners?
Okay, so if you're like a young teenager, young
For example,
adult,
if it's going to be my first book that I'm going to read, okay?
How
so
old are you?
Let's start from there. Imagine 15 years old boy.
15
you know,
years? Okay, so Neil Gaiman, there is this book called The Graveyard Book, and he is a screenwriter, he's a script writer, he writes for films as well as he writes for children and adults. So The Graveyard Book, it's about a little boy whose parents get murdered at night, and then he escapes into the graveyard, and there's supernatural beings that take care of this little kid who's called Nobody, short form Bod, that's his nickname. So his whole childhood is just being surrounded by ghosts and the caretaker of the graveyard. And of course, there's a murder mystery thrown in.
I mean, it's great, but I've seen kids, you know, who when read such books, you know, then eventually they think that as if there are some supernatural powers alongside them and that they're accompanied with them. And then, you know, all day their behavior is really different. You're like, hi, Mamu, I see you. You don't see that, what I see. And I'm like, okay, what are you seeing? Because a lot of my nephews and nieces, alhamdulillah, they have this regular habit of studying every time they're over to our place. That's what they do, and they talk about it. So don't you think that we really would want our kids not to think that, you know, there are supernatural beings around us?
Fiction, man.
I mean, but for kids, once they start to read about it, they start to practice it too as well.
That's very true, because when I used to read a Harry Potter, there was a time I believed that my letter is lost somewhere and then owl was killed or something like that. But that's a fiction, obviously.
I thought I was, you know, going to the visiting school of Hogwarts, and I thought I was
in
one of these schools.
Exactly.
But, you know,
it's good,
that's the beauty of imagination. It's a conversation starter.
True.
You know, I think we're all talking about being connected in a social media world where we are very also disconnected. So by reading and having these conversations, you are connecting with people. You know, going to the library is an experience.
Exactly.
It's not just about books. It's about meeting people, having a conversation. For me, when I think of library, it's not just books. It's also about having a conversation, just, you know, asking someone, a random stranger, hey, can you recommend a book? Even asking someone to help me get a book from a shelf, or even asking, hey, what are the new books that have come up? So for me, library is also community space. And I'm a strong advocate that we need those spaces.
And what are the other books that you would recommend apart from this one?
Okay, so there's another book. It's called The Light That We Cannot See. It's by Anthony Doerr. Again, it's fiction. It was published in 2014. It's set in World War II. So I'm a huge fan of war literature. And again, it's the story of a blind girl who's trying to escape the horrors of the war. She is blind, so that's one thing to look out for. There's a hidden gem somewhere in the museum that her father's working for. Then you have the German occupation.
Yes.
There's a love story. So that's an interesting book.
And Yamna, I think I believe that you might have been aware with the recent movement in the literature where they just have eradicated a lot of words, especially from the book called Matilda, and there's this very
there was a lot of debate about it
fascism,
too,
yeah, which is seeping into this, I think, very liberal sort of liberal authoritarianism, where they are removing words and they're saying this is not politically correct, right?
Yeah.
So do you believe with this assertion in the first place, I mean, whitewashing all of those words, so just because they were not politically correct back at that time when the political correctness was not that huge theme as it is now.
And there's a lot of inclusion where people relate to rainbows as well, you know, that's how they refer to it as well. And then eventually I think people really need to keep an eye out on the kind of content which is being produced even in the name of books.
Yes.
That is true, but I think I am a favor of having a dialogue and discussion. So when we're dissecting these themes, even with Disney movies, you know, Cinderella and The Little Mermaid, there's a lot of like gender analysis.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, even Games of Thrones was gender analyzed, by the way.
Yes, yes.
So there's a lot of social political correctness going on. Is that a bad thing? I feel like people are critically thinking. They're asking questions.
But then eradicating history in the favor of that, is that a good thing?
I do not want history to be eradicated.
Of course.
It's good to have that dialogue. So
Yes.
let's see which direction goes. Again, you have people for this movement.
But what if
or-
history was forged already?
Oh God.
How do we know?
Then we have to find out the
So
true
this is what is
historian.
happening.
And that's
actually.
our responsibility, and that's
Yeah.
what I exactly wanted you to say as well. That for people who are out there, rather than coming up with these questions, why don't you put in the research work? And I think
Exactly.
people really need to do that. But thank you so much, Yamuna,
Thank you
for
so
being
much.
with us. Lovely to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so
Now,
much.
there are 2-3 more benefits which I would definitely want to share with people, and that is that for people like us who are presenters, who are on television, who go on to mass public gatherings as well, you know, reading books, ladies and gentlemen, help me with vocabulary. It helps me with jargon. It helps me with such amazing content that people are in an awe of you. Oh my God, you know, this
Sentence
gentleman knows so
formation
much.
and
You know, so,
whatnot, yes.
yeah, so this is something which why I would want to recommend books to you. Let's ask Yamuna, so why do you think people should be reading? What benefits do you think they will reap out of it?
You've already said, you've stolen my thunder. You've already talked about those points. But I think it's just good to be connected, good to know ideas. I would say read something from total another part of the world.
Okay.
You know, read something from the Australian Aboriginal history.
Yeah.
You know, read something from the Pacific Islands.
Yeah.
Read something from the Japanese literature, Korean literature.
I read something from Afghanistan, you know, by Khalid Hosseini. It was
Get
great.
out of your comfort zone. Pick a, you know, just look at the globe, put your finger and say, today, if you reach to Spain, say, guess what? I'm going to do some research on Spanish authors.
Wow.
And it might take you on a journey, open new doors, learn about new culture.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so
And then eventually, if you are in Spain, you know, you're going to have a great
also-
conversation with somebody.
exactly.
At least, yes.
Perhaps inspire you to travel to Spain as well.
True. Yes.
Yes, and I think there's also great debate, but we will save it from some other day about the books and the e-books, because I used to read a lot of e-books, but then I jumped onto the book wagon because books have their own charm, the charm and the aroma of reading through the words that are written on the page, and the hard copy is definitely worth it. And obviously, you have a great retention power when it comes to the hard
Exactly.
copies.
And Hajra, in addition to the very sorry, because I just remember what you said. So imagine that, you know, in our books, when we were in our school, we used to learn about Remembrine. You know, if you remember him, you know, he was an artist from Holland. Yes. So I went over there to his square, and it was, I got nostalgic about it. And I was like, यार, हम जिसके बारे में पढ़ रहे थे वो तो यहाँ हॉलैंड में मौजूद है, ये हमें क्यों पढ़ा रहे? So imagine that connection I felt, and when I sat down over there on, because they call it a dam, you know, they call Square a dam as well over there, and there were a lot of people, and then I was talking to them that, you know, that your master over here has actually been taught to us, and they were really happy about it.
Oh, really wonderful. So with that, we will say thank you to Yamuna. Thank you so much for coming here and having this wonderful cross-pollination of ideas about the books, about the
Good morning.
Good
Have a great day.